Flint Dille wrote your childhood. From his work on 80s cartoon classics like Transformers, G.I. Joe, The Garbage Pail Kids, and Inhumanoids, to the interactive novels he wrote with Gary Gygax, creator of Dungeons & Dragons, Flint had a hand in many pockets of 80s popular culture. He has worked with Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Frank Miller, Jack Kirby, and a raft of others as a writer, story editor, showrunner, and or producer of iconic entertainment in almost every medium. The Gamesmaster is Dille's memoir, looking through his own unique story, his blend of pop culture, social history, and reportage about the groundbreaking 1980s. And the parts he and his colleagues, collaborators, employers, and friends played in making it a genuine golden age.
Thanks. Okay, everybody, this is Kim and Ben from Read It Again Books, and today we're here with Flint Dille. Hi, Flint. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, good to be here. I don't know how I fell up on that introduction. You know, it sounds a lot better than I really am. But I like that.
So your new book, which just came out this week, Ben and I both loved it, and we loved it. I mean, we devoured that sucker. And we have in front of us this giant sheet of notes that I took while I was reading it. And then Ben added stuff. And so we have questions because to quote Hamilton, you were in the room when this stuff happened. Yeah.
It's that's why it's called Almost Famous, in the sense that all the people I was around, I was just this guy stumbling from really great situation to great situation. I mean, yeah, I was actually embedded in some of them, but I mean, it was pretty cool. And a lot of people
felt like you were the Forrest Gump of the 1980s culture. You just kept popping up everywhere. All these pivotal moments.
I know. I mean, I tell these stories, nobody really ever believed them. They wouldn't get in the context of it at all. And so, I finally decided I'm just going to write this all down. I mean, I was posting bits and pieces out on Facebook, and it all started when I'd answered a lot of fan interviews, and I realized I had 150 pages of interview questions. Wow. And I figured, wow, I can just change this slightly and just write it. And it was just kind of a good project, to have.
We both. Well, I listened to the audiobook. Ben had a advanced copy, and yeah, I devoured it. It was really good. I just wanted more. I wanted to know what you're doing in the 90s, and now I'm like, keep telling me your stories. Don't stop. It was really good.
Kim was like Unicron eating Moonbase 1. It was She just devoured it.
Show me your little thingy.
The Autobot Matrix. Well, of course.
Is that from the Prime Collector's 25th edition or something?
I don't know where this came from. I feel like I have a memory of one of my kids getting the 2000s equivalent of Optimus Prime, and he was this giant figure, and I think he came with the.
That is exactly. I got
the Matrix of Leadership or something. Yeah.
In the background playing, I think, Warcraft. It somewhere while he was playing with it.
Yeah. I don't know where the Optimus Prime giant figure went, but I somehow managed to hold on.
I have a closet full of this. So my wife has limited tolerance for this stuff. So
I don't know what that's like at all.
I find and pull things out. Like I found, here's a really rare tropical object. The script for the pilot and the second script for the second season of Inhumanoids had never happened.
Oh my goodness.
Weird, weird stuff in the closet.
Well, now these are great artifacts for you to pull out when you talk about your book, right? You finally, as Kim said about my hoarding, it's finally paid off.
Well, I know you have a fascinating collection of characters up there too.
Well, Trailblazer was my very first Transformer I ever bought with my own money, and he's broken about 10 different ways, but I managed to put him in just the right spot so he stays in one piece, at least for the interview.
Well, it's really funny. I have a busted up Megatron back when he was the Walther PPK. You can't get that one anymore.
Yes.
And it's like missing stuff and falling apart and all that. But that's what I was kind of, when I write myself into the corner working on the movie script, I just like try to put them together. And he really works for the wearer, but he's kind of a historical artifact now.
Yep.
Okay. Are we done talking about toys?
Oh, we have to talk about the book now?
All right, we're done.
Okay. So in the book, you quote Jack Kirby as saying, when is the golden age of comics? It's when you're 12.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Love that. So when was your golden age of comics? Like, who did you work with?
I mean, the truth is that, I say in the book, I mean, unlike a lot of, most everybody I was, working with, I read comics up until about summer after, probably Boy Scout camp, summer before I went to high school. And then in high school, we weren't reading comics. I was playing in a band. I was doing whatever you do in high school. And I didn't even think about comics, except later when I was at Berkeley, they had a comic shop. And I remember walking in and being kind of amazed that like a store could stay in business selling nothing but comics, and I'd go into the game store a lot because I was still gaming then. But it was funny, And so then when I was re-immersed in this animation world, everybody was into comics. I was the only sort of intrinsically game person there. Mm-hmm. And so just by osmosis, I got sucked into it.
So speaking of games, I know you had a huge hand in the original development of D&D. Ben's my go-to guy.
Misrepresent that. I came later on. Yeah, I met Gary in the 80s, and he decided like 74, I think, is when it came out. So It was already around. I was around for second edition, and then for the Dungeon and Dragon Beverly Hills adventure. I just didn't want to misrepresent.
That's all of D&D I know from the guy we're sharing the screen with. So
yes, reading some of those stories in your book about just again being in the room where all these things were being created, how they had the idea to turn the miniatures game into a role-playing game, and the table of sand that had all the the armies on it, and how that slowly turned into the role-playing game. That was just a fascinating glimpse into the history of that phenomenon, Dungeons and Dragons phenomenon.
Well, yeah, I mean that's no small part of what the book's about. It's really about this kind of collision of wildly different people that all got together in the 80s and all stumbled into each other, and comic book guys are bringing things to animation that had never been there before. Yeah, the game guys are cross-pollinating with us. I mean, I remember the stories in the book when I took a bunch of, Hasbro sent us a bunch of Transformers and Joes up to the mansion, right? There's this giant mansion lawn, and there are people wearing their maid and butler outfits, and we're making a giant miniatures game out of Transformers and Joes, and we're trying to figure out now if Megatron fires his gun, how much damage does that do? Yeah, and that's about as geeky as it gets, but it was really fun, and it was just the aesthetic of it was worth the price of admission.
Yeah. Well, the idea behind pitting Transformers versus G.I. Joe is obviously something that has been explored many times.
Yeah. Well, we were just exploring it at a real world miniatures game context, just for fun. I mean, that was just so fun. I mean, what's great about those periods is people are just out doing things because they think they're cool to do. I mean, nobody ever, thought, we're going to make this into a product. It wasn't like, I mean, we were advertising products on the shows, but it was just like, you just sort of show up and everybody think it was really cool. Oh, there are a bunch of Transformers and G.I. Joes here. Let's make a game out of it, And just with the ridiculous collection of characters that were there, it was great.
So we briefly talked about, but you're dyslexic.
Yes.
And, well, I'm dyslexic, and I own a bookstore.
Yeah, you own a bookstore. I mean, we get past it, and people think I never really understood this because I've always been really open about it, and people think it's like really something, I mean, most people know it's something you get over, and I view it as kind of a triumph story that you have dyslexia and then become a writer, but
you build workarounds. Your brain doesn't work one way, so you figure out which way it does work. And I mean, when we were kids, they didn't know what it was. In the 80s, when I was tested, it was just, they were just starting to figure out what it was. And the only reason I got tested is because my mom had it, and she realized I was doing the same thing she's did as a child, and they weren't working.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Were you having reading problems at the time, or what? You know?
I didn't learn to read till 3rd grade. The second time I did it, I read by memorizing. So if I've never seen a word written before, I can't read it. I can't sound words out. I'm horrible at math. I would add extra numbers at the end.
Wow. Yeah, no, I like that, and it sort of goes with it, mixed dominance. And I remember what I do remember, I had to have been 5 when this happened, is the local public school, they were telling my mother, well, we don't know that we'll be able to teach them to read, but we'll teach them to be able to read, recognize symbols and things. And my parents would, and I was in a special reading program from there on out.
Did you have anybody that really was your champion in school, like a teacher that you really?
Well, there was a special reading program teacher, and it was all the kids in the class had the same thing. And what was weird about it is they tended to be the cool kids in the class, so I didn't think that it was, there was something horribly wrong with me. I just thought, maybe we're a secret genius society or something. That turned out not to be true, but nevertheless, it was pretty cool.
You mentioned one of your high school teachers that was it high school, maybe it was younger, that read a short story of yours and looked past at all the mistakes you made and were like, wow, this is a really good story. And you mentioned that in your book.
Yeah, that was the only encouragement I ever got in this direction.
Oh no.
Certainly before college. Yeah, it was I mean, he just read this. It was a story called Ben and the Miniman. I still want to write it. Yeah. It's like you get these ideas when you're 10, and at some point I have to get rid of it. But yeah.
No. You don't ever have to get rid of it. That's the key to hoarding.
Yeah, a kid who made a bunch of action figures. They had those things called creepy crawlies then, but you had Army men creepy crawlies. So basically it was G.I. Joes. I mean, I hadn't thought about it that way, and maybe all that work came out later on.
So speaking of people who influenced you, and we did kind of talk about this earlier, you've met so many famous people. Were you ever starstruck? Were you ever
oh, all the time. I mean,
who the most?
Well, different people in different ways. I mean, you were referring to Jack Kirby earlier. Okay. It's like, I'd been working with the guy for a week and a half. I had no idea. He was just an old guy named Jack. Okay. Now I say old guy, I mean, he was probably about the age I am now. But I was, just out of film school, and Joe Ruby said, hey, just go work with Jack and come up with some ideas. Working with him for 2 weeks. And finally he says, back when I created Captain America, I realized Jack Kirby. Jack is Jack Kirby, but he didn't act like. I mean, he was just a guy in there in trenches, kind of come up with ideas with me. I mean, it was amazing like that. I mean, being it's 1984, and you're working for George Lucas, and you finally get taken to his office on the ranch, which is just opening up. And I mean, it was. You're on the yellow brick road. And it was. I mean, that's super starstruck. Because he was exactly, what you wanted and expected George Lucas to be. Mm-hmm. Meeting Gary was funny in that Gary Gygax, because he was, I mean, I knew I was going to meet him and all that, but with him, 2 seconds in, I just felt like I'd known the guy for 10 years. I mean, we were talking about ancient history or something. It was, so I mean, it wasn't really like meeting someone. And then the beginning of the book's the story about meeting Frank Miller, who's a contemporary. And, he's just doing his Batman book, and, we're trying to help him have Superman and Batman fight. And I'm trying to figure out how to kill Optimus Prime. And, it's all in one meeting. Frank and I have had pretty much the same relationship ever since. It's great.
Well, the way that you've told these stories, or that you tell these stories in the book, it makes us, or at least it made me, feel this sense of being starstruck as well.
Yeah.
Because you kept mentioning all these what we now know are these famous people, and back then, well, some of them are already famous, but back then, they might not have been household names. Yeah. And we're just like, oh my gosh, he met Gary Gygax. Oh my gosh, he was in the Dungeons and Dragons Entertainment Castle or Corporation Complex or whatever it was. It's a really amazing set of stories.
No, it was, because it was a really great adventure. I mean, that's why I decided to write a book about it. Just because I mean, it was people kind of, their eyes would sort of bug out when I'd be talking about it. And it doesn't seem weird to you at the time because that was my life. I mean, it wasn't, I was super, meeting, some of these people, it was really starstruck. I mean, oddly enough, when I actually met Steven Spielberg, it was, I'd been hired and I'd been working on some projects, but he was off shooting something. I was basically crashed out on his story editor's couch because I'd been working all night rewriting it. They had me rewrite a promo they did, and it took me all night. And then we were out on the shoot at Backlot of Universal, and next thing I know, this guy pulling on my foot, Steven Spielberg, kind of waking me up and thanking me for staying up all night.
He's like, "Get off my couch."
Yeah, no, he didn't care if I was on the couch. He's a great guy. I mean, what's funny about all these people in the book is they're all exactly, at the time, were exactly what I wanted them to be. Mm-hmm. My dad knew Ray Bradbury, so I mean, I met him in a more kind of formal context, but he was my hero. I mean, it's like, I mean, that's what I read when I was coming up. He's great.
They weren't different than the image you had of them in your mind before you met them. They just were exactly the way you had imagined them.
If anything better, and that was a long time ago. So all of them were the age they were supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And kind of looked like they were supposed to look. And, I mean, it was, it's kind of like seeing rock bands, it's like, you see Keith Richard now, it's still Keith Richard, but he doesn't look like, the 70s, 60s, 70s. And I saw like the real 60s, 70s ones.
Yeah. So we both loved the story of how you met Orson Welles.
Yeah. Well, there too. What's really funny is I met him twice. Yeah. The Transformers, when he voiced Unicron in Transformers, was actually the second time, and I'd forgot. I don't know how you do this, but I had forgotten the first time until I was reading Gary's blog after he died, and Gary had wanted him to play the dungeon master in the Dungeon and Dragon movie, and he mentioned that when we had the meeting with him, I said, "Oh yeah, that's right." I mean, because that was just such a totally different meeting, and and like. One scene I left out of the book because I couldn't remember whether I had it right is I think I met him at the Magic Castle, and somebody got us there, but it may have been at Mama San restaurant. I just don't remember where. I just remember the guy. But and Gary and I sitting there and we're talking to Orson Welles. It's pretty cool. But I'd forgotten that meeting happened before the Transformer movie.
Well,
later on, I realized it had to have happened. But that's the funny thing is your memory, you one memory triggers another, because this is a while ago. And I didn't really have journals from the period. I kind of decided, because that's what's known as the digital dark age, because everybody's working on different formats that you can't resurrect now. And so I didn't know I'd printed out a lot of my journals. I just thought they're just lost or they're on some, plastic Mac, 4-inch Mac disk that I'd never resurrect. And I just decided I was going to write the book from memory, but a lot of the people in it are still around, and so I'd send over copies and stories, and they could correct me or remind me of something else, whatever. So,
I'm glad that at certain parts of the book you admit that. You say, "Look, this is my recollection of what happened. It may not be exactly what happened, but it's still a great story, and I wanted to tell it." And we're glad that you included those.
Narrative. What is funny though is afterwards I did find one of the journals from that period. And I was shocked by how accurate it was, that everything in the book is, either somebody else has vetted it, or I say in the book, look, that's how I remember it, but because nobody else alive who was there. So
trust me.
Yeah, trust me. But I found the journal. I was amazed at how I had the order of everything right, and of course you leave out the garbage you put in your journal because nobody cares, right? But the actual events were right. And you realize that the stuff that's really important in your life that you're writing about 35 years later is wildly different than what you thought was important at the time. That's kind of an interesting little life experience.
You talk about a lot in the book about the hero's journey. And I don't think I've ever read a biography where the author talks about his own hero's journey. And I thought that was a good way to approach it.
Well, that was my editor's idea. Okay, what I had this mess of stories, right? And I had just my methodology was not what I would recommend for anybody else, but it was mine, and that was I just sort of write about whatever I found interesting that day, or somebody on my Facebook page would ask me something, because the book was basically crowdsourced off Facebook, right? I'd write a little article, people comment on it, they'd ask me questions, I'd write more. Then finally, at one point, I said, I'm thinking of making this a book. Anybody have any ideas for the titles? And so somebody suggested the Gamemaster, and it had 70 thumbs up. So I went with Gamesmaster. It was, and I found my agent on Facebook. I found my publishing house on Facebook. It was pretty cool. It was just kind of a social media experiment. And I can't even remember where I still was.
Hero's Journey.
Okay. So anyway, I had this mess, and my editor said, well, you ought to make this a hero's journey, because in the middle of the thing, literally, George Lucas handed us Hero of a Thousand Faces, from which Joseph Campbell's book, and Bruno Bettelheim's Uses of Enchantment too was the other book. But and I realized, okay, that's a hero's journey. But since it was relevant to the content of the book, because that was where I found out about it. I mean, literally, the real George Lucas hands you a book, you pay attention, right? And so I thought, that's a good way to structure it, because what the story's really about, the unifying thing is I start out this kind of noob stumbling out of film school and end up being sort of a real writer and having had a lot of adventures. And by the time the story ends, I'd moved on to, I was crossing some different threshold. See what I mean? So it sort of fit, but my editor suggested it, and it worked. Of course, my wife, when she was going over it later on, was saying, we kind of lost the hero's journey for a while. So we went in because what was funny is the final edit was happening just as the world was shutting down for COVID. And so, I had to get it done, and it's like, it's one of those things where you have 50 decisions to make, and if you get, 30 of them right, you're feeling good about yourself.
We have a couple questions from our audience.
Oh, sure.
Carlos asks, do you feel like Stranger Things is a good description of the 80s D&D gaming culture?
Well, it's the TV, it's certainly the TV version. Yeah, I think it's a really nice one. I think E.T. I mean, Gary kind of objected to E.T. because they were gambling and stuff like that. I don't know. That was what part of Gary that was. The real Gary, even though he told me he objected to it, the real Gary was probably just fine with the way, at that point they were transitioning into being a company, which of course kills everything. But he objected to it, but I think E.T. was. I think Stranger Things was a perfect thing. I mean, Stranger Things, in no small part, kind of reignited this 80s frenzy that's going on. And so, I love it for that reason, and because it captures what that period felt like. I mean, it was really just a great period, magic items were appearing all the time. You get little boxes that, you played games on. I mean, that didn't exist anymore. And then you had the arcade games in the beginning, and you had the consoles at the end, and everybody had a computer, and getting a word processor was like, somebody just giving you the tablets from the Sermon on the Mount or something like that. I mean, it was just this amazingly magical time, and Stranger Things really captures that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about while I was reading your book that if you missed a TV show, you missed a TV show. I remember being so upset at my parents because they made me go out to dinner and I couldn't watch A Quantum Leap. And kids don't get that.
Okay.
Anymore.
Life was so, and there's part of me that wants some of that back, but life was so ephemeral is not the right word, but it was, you had to grab it right then. I mean, but that was the first moment in human history where you actually had a VCR and you actually could set it, but nobody I knew could set it. I mean, I could set mine, but there was probably a 30%, chance it wouldn't work. And there was an 80% chance something would be wrong, like I wouldn't get the end of the episode or the tape would run. It was not now. But nevertheless, what was kind of wonderful about that, I mean, you always get something and you lose something with technology. And what was wonderful about that is everybody was doing the same thing at the same time. Everybody saw that show last night. Everybody was talking about the next day. It wasn't like now where, everybody's, streaming and binging and they're all in a different place, or people listen to most of their music privately on earbuds. That was, you had boombox. I mean, there was you had guys like, Blaster and, and Soundwave and people like that, in Transformers, is people carried these giant boxes around with music blaring out of them, and started out with cassette tapes and ended with CDs by the end of the 80s. That was
man, that totally reminds me. I was going to record this interview. We just set this to record.
I'm sure that'll work real well for you. There you go. There you go. Your cassettes are going to come flying out of there.
That reminds me of a quote, something about men would rather be caught with porn than with toys. That was something in the early 80s. Any adult male would rather be caught with porn than toys. That's not the case anymore.
No, that's I mean, back then, did I say that in the book?
Yeah, you did.
Okay, that was pretty. It's pretty like PG book, but that was true. That was also when all of that changed, and my cultural argument on that was that exactly that moment, the mid 80s, because the book covers from 83 to 87. I mean, with a little bit of explaining backstory and sort of a little here and there explaining where things went. But right in that exact period was the first time in human history when kids had capabilities that adults didn't have. Parents were being sent off to, and you would have thought they were being put in jail or something. They were being sent off to learn how to use computers. And they were terrified by them, and they were terrified because this was their job. And if they couldn't figure it out, they were obsolete. Their kids intuitively and easily figured it out. I hit this seam, I was born the same year as Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, as a way to think about it. And I hit this seam where I was still young enough I could sort of learn this stuff. I wasn't like a kid. Okay. But I mean, but tech wasn't totally alien. I was still imprintable. I certainly understood, arcade games and all that. Whereas a generation older than that never got entirely comfortable with it, or they had to work at it. And any kid immediately knew this stuff. And, this period, Rubik's Cube started it. I mean, you had all these, people with IQs of 190 that were, could instantly do your Rubik's Cube, and real people couldn't do that.
Wasn't there a Rubik's Cube cartoon?
So what?
Wasn't there a Rubik's Cube cartoon?
Yeah, indeed there was. And that was really,
I remember it.
That company I was at did that. I had nothing myself to do with that cartoon, but company work.
I remember that. And you talk about like TV shows being forgettable, but I mean, I remember all the shows you worked on, so I don't think if you touched it, it was forgettable. So like I loved Mr. T when I was little, and
you remember, you don't feel old enough to know what Mr. T was.
I watched those on Saturday morning cartoons. Teaming up with Mr. T, and he had the breakfast cereal, and he would Pity the Fool who don't eat my breakfast cereal.
Pity the Fool. It was like copyrighted.
In the show he didn't, but in the commercial for his breakfast cereal he did.
They did not allow us to have him say "Pity the Fool," and I never. The reason for that was never clear. It may well have been copyright. It may have been that. I mean, this was in children's television was very concerned about everything, and I remember because this is network children's television, and they didn't want Mr. T to appear threatening. How do you do Mr. T? Did anybody see him in Rocky III? How do you take that guy and make him not threatening? Okay, I mean, just look at him. Imagine what that looked like in 1983. But so he was supposed to be not threatening, so he couldn't say. And fool was name calling, and they didn't like name calling. And so the whole trick with that show was the relationship between the character, the persona of Mr. T, and like how do you present that to children. Yeah, and that's why in the book I was talking about the one gag the network liked, and I was kind of surprised they let it go. Was when he saw himself in a funhouse mirror and got scared. They thought that was actually funny.
Let's talk about Transformers. I had my kids watch the movie with me. I hadn't seen it since I was like 8, and I remember being pissed that Optimus Prime died. Ben, who was like 13 at the time. Do you want to tell him what you did?
You weren't the guy that locked himself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out.
No, but I do remember crying.
we inflicted a lot more trauma on people than we would have. Which I've said a lot. I say it in the book, and I have two opposite feelings about it. The one feeling's new, And the old feeling was, if we hadn't done that and people hadn't gotten so upset, nobody would remember any of this stuff.
I agree.
You know?
Absolutely agree. And when you said that in the book, I was like, yes.
And so I absolutely believe that. At the exact same moment, I believe that what we did was kind of a violation. That be a part of what was so wonderful about those shows is that, you knew you could turn them on when you were a kid and nothing that really hurt was going to happen. There would be shots being fired, everybody would be in jeopardy, horrible things would be at risk. And I have a Mr. T cartoon puzzle in Kim's made.
Yes, she does.
And that's part of why it was so shocking, because you had, all these episodes where they're shooting lasers and nobody ever, except for Jetfire.
Yeah, right.
Nobody ever died. And then all of a sudden in the cartoon, spoiler, if you haven't seen it, almost everybody dies.
Well, my kids were like, woo, this is violent. I kind of like it. I mean, they're like 16, so.
Yeah, well, 16 is a whole different age, you know. And that was the other thing is like, yes, Star Wars had already been out and all that, but we didn't know that nobody really trod that ground before. I mean, nobody Mad Masters the Universe and, killed him, I mean, and, there were toys and this sounds kind of insensitive. In fact, it is kind of insensitive, but we were used to getting these faxes at the time. You'd be in the office and, somebody'd bring in, oh, we got a fax. And the fax would say, Jetfire has been discontinued, and so, and so we just wouldn't put him in Jetfire. Actually, I mean, you have the one model up there. It's his own unique story that gets into licensing and character. I think he's the one that appears to have died on the series. But Jetfire or Ashtray has been discontinued. I'll just use characters that don't exist, and use Dipstick instead. And so we take Ashtray out of the script and put Dipstick into the script, and and go from there. And we sometimes spend a little time introducing him, but that really we had 134 characters. When you think about that, it's just a lot of characters. And so we were used to him being discontinued, and so. What we knew, the movie's job was to introduce the 86 line and get rid of the 85 line. And so, what we knew is that all characters kids loved have been discontinued. And at one point, we had a script where there was this massive Charge of the Light Brigade of basically the entire, 85 product line, and they all got slaughtered on their way into Cybertron. That we did not do that scene. Even we knew that was cool. But I thought of it. I mean, I always thought of that movie, because you recapitulate your own childhood when you're doing stuff. And what the first movie that impacted me, and I never came back from it was the Alamo. It was John Wayne's version of it, and everybody got killed in it. And I thought Davy Crockett was the coolest thing in the world afterwards. And that's, then the first scene that's when Frank says, yeah, but you got to do it like the 300 Spartans. And I said, I never saw that. And, sure enough, 10 years later, we're doing 300,
Well, I like that you made him a martyr, and you mentioned that in your book.
Yeah.
And that really just struck with me. So, yeah.
I mean, so in one level, I feel like, that's why we're having this conversation. At another level, I feel like, we kind of violated a deal. But then again, if I have the excuse that pastes the two thoughts together, that was a movie. And when you go into a movie, we're not dumping this off in your living room. You have to cross the threshold, and now you're going to have that story. Yeah, but what we knew was that Rodimus was going to be the main guy next season, and Optimus was going to be at the big Cybertron in the
sky. We watched, Ben and I both watched the Toys That Made Us to see you in there. Yeah, and I didn't think about it that those are basically 20-minute toy cartoons. I mean, Now, from a creative point of view, as a writer and story editor and producer on these shows, it was the most creative freedom I could remember. I mean, all Hasbro cared about is they just wanted to see their toys in the show. They didn't really much care what we did with them. They didn't say you have to have 17 and a half seconds of, good action with with hubcap. They didn't say that. They just said, we want to see hubcap in there, and we put hubcap in. And they didn't say we couldn't use our other characters that everybody liked.
And what happened, especially true with G.I. Joe, is because the character, you put in the swamp buggy. Well, all of a sudden, then we have to have a swamp scene, and it actually made the stories more like James Bond movies or something. And now you're cutting to the swamp, and so we had to build the stories, and I think it made the stories better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what'd you say? Made them avenging angels. But Ben, you had a couple questions about Transformer conventions.
Yes, I watched a few clips of you at various conventions, and I tried not to watch too many, but I wanted to watch enough to kind of see, what people are asking about. And then it occurred to me a good question to ask would be, what is the one question you keep getting asked that you're just so tired of being asked at Transformers conventions?
Well, I'm not sure I want to spend a lot of time answering why we killed Optimus Prime, because I was acting under orders. A lot of that stuff. I mean, the hard ones are just okay. I mean, I was on a super hardcore, really it was a great show. But these guys are would watch the Transformer movie and spent one episode on every minute of the movie. I'm not making this up. That really happened.
Oh my goodness.
And I don't think I spent and they were trying to figure out whether Thundercracker in fact turned into Cyclonus, and they were having this large debate. And the answer, was, I mean, because what's the real answer? All right, 35 years ago, I'm sitting there in draft 27 of the movie. What I remembered was that. So sometimes you reason this stuff out, and it's actually kind of satisfying. I mean, I thought of Starscream and Blitzwing and Thundercracker as being a trinity, right? Not Blitzwing, the other F-16,
Skywarp.
I thought of them as being kind of a trinity. Yes, exactly. What threw me off and messed up my dyslexic brain is I'm actually looking at Skywarp, and so I'm not thinking of the name Skywarp. Never mind.
Yeah.
And we'll explain it. Anyway, so I thought of Thundercracker, Skywarp, and Starscream as being a trinity. So I would have, if I were writing it, Cyclonus had to, we ran out of things. Obviously, it wasn't Starscream, and we knew it wasn't Blitzwing, so it had to be Skywarp. So I finally answered this ancient question, but a lot of times people ask you questions like, Wheeljack was left-handed in in episode 67 and right, and it's like, guys, we sent this stuff off to some country on the other
Asia.
Yeah, some of the PCH, it just came back the way it came back. Or something had to flop the cell, when he was
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I remember. So I had Skywarp, and then my friend in the neighborhood, he had one of the other jet planes, and so we would, whenever we would get together, we'd make sure we'd both bring our planes. Conversely, or on the similar hand, I had Optimus Prime and he had Megatron, so we would make sure, don't forget to bring Optimus Prime when you come over to my house. Okay, don't forget to bring Megatron when you come over to my house. And like you were talking about the holy trinity of those planes, it's like, you're right. They're not complete without the others in the set. And so that was
that's what I always thought of it. When there were so many characters, what I like to do is just cluster them. And some of them were naturally clustered, like Dinobots or Constructicons. They're just clustered. Insecticons. The wildlife animals. Rabbit. Those guys. They naturally cluster. Other ones, they just seem to work together as a group, either for size reasons or personality reasons and stuff like that. So the show's ultimately resolved to core groups after. An episode didn't feel right unless Megatron and Starscream were in there too. That was just me. And you had to have Optimus and Bumblebee on the other side. Then after that, you can mess with stuff. That's why season 3, I think, was so disorienting for people, because all of a sudden, those characters aren't in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
However, had there not been season 3, I don't think the franchise, there wouldn't have been much to build, generations of comic books and later TV shows and all that from.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of the Transformers phenomenon, that's probably the biggest thing from your book that I was looking forward to you talking about was the Transformers the movie, the epic movie. And
Right.
I felt like you knew that was going to be what we wanted, and so you deliberately put it at the end of the book. I mean, I know you were going in mostly chronological order, but it was a brilliant way to keep us in suspense and get us to the end, because this is what I really wanted to see, even though I enjoyed all of it.
No, well, that was the thing. You see, and also too, the book has a lot of stuff that's redundant in it, and no small part of that was I knew people were going to cherry pick what they wanted to read. Mm-hmm. If you're a Transformer fan, you can go read all the Transformer stuff, and I was trying to suck people into reading the other parts. Mm-hmm. So I split it all up as much as I could. I sort of foreshadowed stuff, and then when I went into a section where I thought somebody would be coming in from, you've now read about the Transformer movie. Then I'd segue and sort of reset up the next situation, mm-hmm. so you didn't feel totally lost. But when I was listening to the audiobook, which was a really fascinating experience, because that book only existed like in the voice.
Hearing your story from somebody else's voice.
Yeah, I've only heard the voice in my head, and in the rare occasions when I read things out loud, and to hear someone else's voice telling my story, it was really refreshing. As a matter of fact, I was sick of my voice. It's kind of cool.
He's the same guy who does the Vince Flynn books, I believe. Yeah.
He did a great job.
Yeah.
He did a fabulous job, because the thing I noticed, because I had a couple of people saying, why didn't you read your own book? And it's like, well, I'm not a performance artist. Mm-hmm. I mean, and reading a book is very different than doing an interview or anything like that. I mean, that's performance. And, I would notice the way it's not the way I heard the phrases in my head, but he actually did them in a better way for making them intelligible for human beings. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And, there's a real craft to that. I think certain people are very good at reading, like Malcolm Gladwell reads his own books really well. Stephen King does at times, but there are other Stephen King books that I'm glad somebody else is reading it. Mm-hmm. It's just its own, sorry.
Yeah. I can't read aloud. I bring in a ringer, Ben here. He does my read alouds. He does the intros and outros for stuff. So my husband will be very upset if we don't discuss G.I. Joe.
Oh, okay, we're on for G.I. Joe.
So he was so excited. We actually just recently watched Community does a spoof on G.I. Joe, and your character's in it.
Yeah, Flint.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad Flint made it in. I promote all Flint appearances of G.I. Joe, product and entertainment.
So tell us a little about G.I. Joe.
Oh, well, G.I. Joe was the first of the Sunbow shows I worked on.
Yeah.
I've done like 5 shows. And G.I. Joe, I mean, for me, was just, Steve Gerber called me up, and I was writing those books with Gary. It was like summer. It was after the disastrous Lucasfilm experience. And I was writing the books with Gary, and I had no idea what the rest of my life was going to look like. And Steve Gerber called me up and said, "Hey, I've kind of fallen behind." Okay, Steve may have been the best but he was not really great with deadlines. And you want to come in and ghost story edit. It wasn't really ghost story editing. Everybody was well aware that I was doing it. But I was, that sounds great. And he said, and he starts pitching me the show. And Steve was just so enthusiastic about the show, because I'd worked on Mr. T with him. And he had a general, his general attitude was, it was skeptical, bordering on cynical on most projects, but not on this one. And so, I mean, he got me all excited about it, and I started reading them, and this was like just, I had to have the first script edited. I didn't know who the characters were. I didn't know anything about the show, but I had to have one done like that day. And what's this cover? Oh, sorry. But I found it was just effortless. I immediately got who the characters were. We had this big, giant, Bible and that was another show that had like 130 characters, and a big Bible with all their bios and pictures. But almost like after 2 scripts, I didn't even need it. I mean, you just knew who the characters were. You knew how they talk. I understood the vibe of the show. G.I. Joe was effortless, and it was just fun and effortless and all that. And so I was not entirely happy when Joe and Tom came and said, "Okay, we want you to do for Transformers what you did for G.I. Joe," but I really like this. And I never really left G.I. Joe. I'd always kind of be around. Like every episode I wrote for G.I. Joe, I was never supposed to be writing episodes. I was a story editor producer, but when one fell out, I'd write one. And so I tried, but by the time I was writing G.I. Joe episodes, I was probably also already working on Transformers. But I'd always try to do something that nobody else would do, just because I knew the show so well, and I knew what a lot of people think Snake Eyes is the best. Sorry, I'm responding to your comments here.
That's fine.
Yeah, ADD kind of comes with all this, right? Steve was, I just loved working on Joe. And my episodes tended to be, first of all, they were kind of romances. We were, they'd always be the episodes where it's okay, we're not going to blow up the headquarters at the end of the episode. We try to break rules in it. And usually I try to think of circumstances where Joe and Cobra were united against some common enemy. Or they were sort of working together, because I love the interplay between them when they weren't trying to kill each other. They thought, I got to deal with this jerk, but nevertheless, it's better than this other thing we're dealing with. So, and I also, I was thinking, what are these guys doing when they're like off duty? What's Flint doing on a Saturday afternoon? What's Lady J doing?
Probably watching Transformers cartoons. It's probably what he's doing.
Flint was driving around in his really great sports car, which was, of course, an optimized version of what I was driving at the time. So it was the flashier, more expensive cartoon version.
I was going to ask you. So you, sorry. I got lost in my comments. Ben, feel free to chime in. Yeah,
sure. So one of the things that I just laughed despite myself was when you used the word garnished in your book. I'm like, I read a lot, but every now and then it's fine if I learn a new word. I'm going to look it up. So I Googled it, or I DuckDuckGo'd it, actually, is probably what I used. And the first search result was a review of your book, where someone pointed out that you had invented this word garnished. I'm like, okay, that doesn't help me. I got to keep digging.
That I think got taken out of the book in some draft, when nobody thought it was necessary, was the origin story of the word garnished. That's not in the book anymore, is it?
Well, I mean, okay, so the full story of me and this word is that you have it on one page. I'm like, what is this book? So I looked it up, and there was nothing there. So I said, I'll keep reading. So this next page, you use it again. I'm like, okay, now he's just playing with me. And then you turn the page, and the third page, you finally talk about how you're trying to come up with a name for the Ewok king from the Ewoks cartoon. And you remember hearing the story, overhearing these two people talking about how they garnished some actor on this list of people they were auditioning, and so you just assumed it had something to do with it was something negative or something along those lines. And so you're
exactly right. It's basically what garnished was a friend of mine, Rich Martini. Okay, figure these are three kids from and Martini and Marconi are both kind of Catholic guys, and I'm just your sort of waspy Protestant guy. It had gotten to Hollywood. Rich Martini sitting in the commissary at Universal Studios, and it was always cool to be able to eat at the commissary in Universal Studios. They had the booth. It looked like Hollywood commissary, like you always thought they'd look like from the movies, right? And he was overhearing these two producers, and they're probably big time producers, the old time guys, and they're trying to cast a movie, and they're saying, let's put Cliff Robertson in there. He's garnished. Let's put pick another actor. Let's put him in there. No, he's in the toilet. And so we concluded that there were two lists. There were actually Martini and Marconi conclude there were two lists. There's a garnished list and there's a toilet list. If you're on the toilet list, you weren't coming back. The garnished list, you could come back, but you were garnished. Okay. Like, I only vaguely knew this is Yiddish. Remember the end of the story, I'm going to be writing a Yiddish movie, right? Bible Goes West, is basically, it's a Yiddish movie. And I always have loved Yiddish. There's just something about the words sound. I mean, it's like you just say the word garnished and you don't really have to tell someone what it means. You don't want to be garnished, right? And but that was our because we were, I mean, it was kind of funny about it was, and we were wildly different levels of sophisticated. I mean, Martini, I think I was actually directing his first movie. He was like fairly real. Marconi, by midway through the story, is a very real screenwriter. And I'm, some noob. I'm doing cartoons, and everybody's laughing at me. The difference, though, is I was actually getting paid. But I mean, financially, nobody was laughing at me. But the fact that I was doing cartoons, I mean, because this was really uncool and disreputable stuff to be doing by real Hollywood standards. Like when I went in, at the end for the, somebody was saying, hey, if you meet Steven, don't tell him you're working on Transformers. Cut to X number of years later, he's executive producer on the Transformer movie. But don't mention that, but nevertheless, it was a great training ground. But Marconi and Martini, and so we just refer to people as being garnished and just caught on, and I still like it now, because no matter who you are, you feel garnished. I mean, I feel garnished all the time, and then you just try to stay out of the toilet list. But everybody goes in and out of being garnished.
Yeah.
So, I'm a big fan of Tiny Toons and Garbage Pail Kids.
Right.
Yeah. Especially, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, Tiny Toons came later. I mean, the very end of the book is I was hired to write Tiny Toons when it was a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then one day Steven came in, and and we were pretty far along, and I mean, we had a script that was basically approved and all that. And he came in, he had a good news, bad news joke, right? Mm-hmm. And the bad news is, we're not going to make the Tiny Toons movie because basically he owed Warner Brothers a show and they had to compete with DuckTales. Mm-hmm. So that was going to be Tiny Toons. But he said, I got good news. I got another movie, and that was Fievel. So it's like, okay, get one. I
love Fievel. Yeah. I remember babysitting a kid and watching Fievel. That's my memory of Fievel.
Yeah. So that was the trade-off on Tiny Toons. But Tiny Toons was, I mean, I talk about that in the book. Like, mm-hmm. I was as ignorant of cartoons as I was of comic books. I mean, I was just a very weird person in this crowd. I mean, I was very well informed on games, but for cartoons
in history.
What? Yes,
in history.
About ancient history. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, ancient history made my life. I mean, it was almost every really great thing that happened to me happened in one way or another when I started talking about ancient history or something. And it was just, I didn't know the difference. I mean, I knew Bugs and Daffy and Roadrunner and Coyote were Warner Brother. I wasn't like that out of it. I had a normal childhood and I'd been around that world. When you got to like further down the cast list, I didn't know if they were Disney or Warner Brothers. And so I had these great friends would explain this to me. And when I was in pitching Tiny Toons, they're just mainlining me with this information, but I still went in without an idea until I was just driving there. And I got this idea for, the Acme Company and Roadrunner and Coyote, and that sold through.
Mm-hmm. And I used to collect the Garbage Pail Kids trading cards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Here, all right. Garbage somewhere in my mystical, closet.
They smelled. You made them stinky.
Yeah. They, I have like an uncut sheet of all of them. Right.
Oh, wow.
Garbage Pail was like, okay, that was an in-house CBS production, right? The network is producing the show. It's not, every other show the network would subcontract or job it out. They actually hired the producers. The head of the network was the executive producer, head of children's television. And this was, I was entering a whole different world. I mean, there's one thing when you're working for toy companies and you're on syndication, and that's like, they refer to as swashbuckler land, which I didn't think of it that way. It was incredibly orderly to me. And then you go to network, and at this point, networks, I wasn't savvy enough at the time to understand it, but they were running scared of syndication. I mean, these things were doing shockingly well, and so they were really trying to compete, which is why they hired me. I didn't read between the lines. This guy named Michael Walker, who also brought Pee-wee's Playhouse to Saturday morning, which was a groundbreaking show. Yeah, but he left before we actually really started the show. And so Garbage Pail Kids, if you actually look at those things, I mean, there's one way to look at them, and it's like a parody, an Art Spiegelman parody of Cabbage Patch Kids. And that's the way 99% of us saw them. However, the children's action groups saw them as ridiculing people with handicaps, saw, as every imaginable form of insensitive. And they just looked at us like, and so in the end, the network, that show didn't get released, I think, till like 2009 or 2010. I mean, it was very recently. They could not air the show on their own network. It just sort of sat there. But I mean, for me, it was because the only way I understood it was that it could be like Mad Magazine, and all these characters would have little stories, and there'd be vignettes, and there'd be fake commercials, and there'd be parodies, and it would be. You guys are like too young to remember this, but there was a show called Rowan and Martin's Laughing, which was a bunch of little shtick bits. It's thing worth knowing about just for the history of media, if no other reason. But so I thought it could be just a collage of little incidents and things.
Stick it to me.
What is it?
Laughing. Stick it to me.
Stick it to me. Yeah. Sock it to me, and interesting but stupid. Just
they pop out of the doors. Yeah. I mean, if you actually look at Saturday Night Live from that period, we think of that as kind of a fast show, but it really wasn't. I mean, they would have, improv things, Second City kinds of things. We'd go on, 10, 15 minutes. Whereas the, Rowan and Martin's Laughing, the whole thing was how fast it was. It's really, yeah.
We do something really fast with Garbage Pail Kids. that just the velocity will carry it across, because it was kind of, I'd never written, the other thing is I'd never written a full-on comedy or a real cartoon before that. And this was about now it turned out to be the perfect training ground for Tiny Toons and Fievel, so it all worked out all right. But that actual project, that was another one of the disasters. I mean, I tried to pace the disasters so I didn't look like a complete loser. But chronologically, they kind of happened that way. I mean, there really was this kind of an arc.
Well, as a child at the time, I didn't see it was a disaster. I thought the cards were hysterical, and the names of the characters were really funny. I mean,
they were incredibly humorous.
I remember buying them with my own money, and my mother being like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yes."
They were really wonderful. And Art Spiegelman's a brilliant guy. I mean, just look at the look. But that's what I'm saying. It totally depends on what classes you put on. If you look at them as a kid or as a regular person, they're just funny and silly and goofy. You look at them as a crusader for children's television and a nightmare show. And plus, fact, you got to have something to complain about anyway. So,
no, I get it. So, we were wondering, what are you doing now?
I'm in this mode right now where I am back being a freelancer. My life is shockingly similar. It was in the 80s, and I love that. The big thing right now. Oh, I like that. So Michael McKnight can listen to me tell stories for hours. Well, I do that. I'm glad he wants to, like my family.
I noticed I guess your son. He's done. He left. He was done listening to you.
He was playing Warcraft. He split. He just graduated from USC.
Oh, congratulations!
So he's hanging around. He's been quarantining with us, and but he's driving up to Northern California to see his friends tomorrow.
So what I'm hearing is that since you're a freelancer now, like you were in the old days, the 80s, the golden years, you would like to write more Transformers and G.I. Joe scripts. What I'm hearing.
I know. I would love to. I mean, here's the deal. What I really want to do right now is I want to do. I would love to go do that again in slightly different medium. And I'm working with different people on projects that might lead in that direction. If you kind of look at my recent bio, you can guess who with. But I'm pursuing a lot of stuff. I'd love to just do. I have a couple TV pilots that I'm working on and getting around. I got a producer for one of them. I'm just back in this mode. I'd been working for an agency called DARPA for a number of years, doing a gamified social network for scientists and engineers and stuff like that. I've been doing a lot of. I've been doing games at Niantic, and now I'm just back being myself, and that's why. The book's kind of a good kickoff for it.
Well, I think there's a large audience, and there probably has always been a large audience for people who would love to see heroes from their past do something or even the same thing again now, which is why when I saw the very first Transformers live action movie and I found out that Peter Cullen was going to be the voice of Optimus Prime, I'm just like, you can't do this movie any other way. And it was just like 80s all over again, even though it was like brand new.
Yeah, the fans had to make that happen. Yeah, because everybody's studio's instinct is to let's, we're doing a reboot, this is a new take and all that. And that's why half of them slip on a banana peel. But the fact of the matter is that Peter Cullen being Optimus Prime was a lot of what put that movie over the top and I think sold the series.
Yeah, when he spoke the first time, I had goosebumps.
I would love to write a Joe movie or a Transformer movie or do something like that. Just because I haven't done it in a while. I mean, the last 20 years of my life have been I've done a couple movies. I did Starship Troopers CG movie, and I did a horror movie that I first writer on it, but it was actually a game design document we sold to Bob and Harvey Weinstein, and that got turned into a movie called Venom. But it's been kind of accidental when I've had a movie made, or I haven't really pursued it. But yeah, I'm in writer mode, and I've had a great time writing this book.
That's awesome.
You've got to keep changing and doing different stuff, or you get really stale. And you're garnished. I don't want to be garnished anymore. So I will, garnished.
Hey Ben, what was that thing that you were pestering me wanting us to say?
Oh, I completely forgot. We were going to start off the interview by by saying the universal greeting.
I was going to start the interview by saying.
Well, we could always end the interview by saying "Ba weep, grana weep, ninny bong," but I mean, it's really up to you.
There is an entire show to be said on Junkion. Imagine the Transformers comedy show on Junkion. There's so many things that they haven't done that people just wouldn't be likely to do.
Yeah.
I did a game. One of the guys stopped in on Transformers a few times since the '80s. I did a game. Transformer game for Treyarch that never shipped, but a lot of it was on Junkion. So we were exploring that, and then I did the first Michael Bay movie game, Traveler's Tales, and I think Activate. I can't remember who the publisher is, so I won't say. And then Chris Metzen and Livio Ramondelli and I did a trilogy of graphic novels for IDW. And that's because, I was working on a game called Diablo 3 with Chris Metzen. I was at Blizzard for the last 6 months of that project. And Metzen turned around one day. This creative guy between Warcraft, StarCraft, and Diablo, right? Okay. I mean, you can argue World of Warcraft's most successful entertainment product in history, right?
Yeah.
He turns around and he says, would you write a Transformer graphic novel with me? And it's like, sure.
Yes.
We thought it would be 22 pages. Well, we've been working on Diablo. I mean, so it was just kind of odd because, he's like a fan himself. I mean, just look at the stuff the guy's done. And I said, and we started out, it was going to be 22 pages. And I figured, that'll be kind of fun. 400 pages later, we finally, in 3 years, we finally get done. So that was my last foray into Transformer world. But I've been doing a lot of stuff with the Hasbro guys recently. Last year, I introduced the Unicron, the most expensive action figure in history. It's a $600 Unicron, right? Oh my gosh. I'm still waiting for it to arrive. My wife, of course, it will be in the closet shortly, but she's dreading the arrival of a 3-foot wide Unicron.
Did you guys really use the Air Force carrier from G.I. Joe's as a coffee table?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The USS flag. Yes. It was because it was huge, right? It was not terribly different than the size of this table. This is the refectory table, by the way, from the book. But it was about the size of that thing. It was gigantic. So we kind of put it up, on a couple, riser kinds of things, and my ashtray sitting there, and a coffee cup sitting there, and the USS flag, and the Sky Striker, and we were
You're using everybody's dream. I wish we could afford that toy as a coffee table. I love it. My husband still talks about that. Apparently somebody on his block had one, and everybody idolized him.
If I have a regret, it is that when we were clearing out the office, when they closed down the Sunbow office, I don't think anybody would have much cared if I just carried it out of there. I mean,
kind of obvious.
I remember sort of looking at, we had this extremely high, like 45-degree angle, probably 60-degree angle stairs that got up there. It's a really cool office in Westwood. And I'm kind of thinking, I pick this up and thinking it'll start falling off and it'll fall apart, and just never did it. And probably Joe and Tom would ask for it back, but yeah, I kind of regret not stealing that. That's high on my list of non-stolen items.
All right. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for doing this with us. And I plan on totally recommending the crap out of your book.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm really glad you enjoyed it, here. And if there's anything you wanted to ask and didn't ask, I plan to be alive for a while, so I'll come back.
We'd love to have you back. I think we could listen to you talk more stories for another hour. If we have some customers who want an autograph copy, like I'm pretty sure Ben wants his autograph. We can figure that out, right? Like,
yes, Rare Bird. You go to Rare Bird is the publisher, and if you order from them, you get a copy that they sign. I've been signing here. It's been really good. I mean, originally they sent me like 2 boxes, and they sent 4 more, and then they sent 6 more, and so a lot of people wanted it. I don't even want my own autograph, but nevertheless, other people do. So
I'll talk with your publisher maybe about doing book plates for the ones that we have in stock.
That would be fabulous. Yeah. And we can communicate on email, and I'll put you together with they set up this meeting, this show, right?
I don't remember.
Somebody set it up. Anyway, one way or another, we will get that taken care of for you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, guys. Thanks again. Everybody buy a copy of Gamesmaster. Support your local independent bookstore. It doesn't have to be me, but I prefer it to be me.
Now, are you physically open now?
Yes, we are.
Oh, shut up.
Everybody, no, it's okay. Everybody has to wear masks when they come in. They have to hand sanitize. But yeah, we're open. So
fantastic.
We did it for a while where we were selling out the front door, and it was enough to get by. So.
No, but that's fantastic. I mean, and that's the other topic we have to get to someday is how we just replant the world with bookstores. I think you miss. First of all, I miss the mega bookstore. I miss the little bookstores. I miss the specialty bookstores. The best bookstore I have is my car wash. I'm not making that up. The West LA car wash on Sepulveda has a great book selection. I mean, they just have this area, and I guess they figured they could only sell with so many air sanitizers and or air.
You got to diversify.
That's hilarious. Like you were talking about earlier in the interview about how you couldn't believe that a store could stay in business just selling comic books, right? You have to diversify.
I want that world back. Every comic shop ought to be selling books. You guys ought to just sublease, sublet little areas of other businesses to sell books in them.
That's pop-up stores. Yeah. We've thought about doing that. Yeah. Last year we expanded our space. We doubled it. And so now we have more room for events, but now we can't hold events because of COVID. So we do this.
But one day this will end.
One day this will end, and we will have you back for your sequel from like the late 80s, early 90s to today, which sounds like a radio station.
Oh, yeah. No, the 90s. Yeah. It's fun.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Mike said amen.
You guys are great.
All right. Good night.
Night.